On Ehrman's telephone game analogy, the oral transmission of the gospel tradition. In this video, we will be reviewing Bart Ehrman's analogy considering the oral transmission between Jesus and the Gospels. Ehrman often repeats a narrative throughout his various books about how everyday people would spread the Jesus story. By the time the evangelists heard and wrote these stories down decades later, the stories would have been corrupted through transmission. This is how Christianity spread, year after year, decade after decade, until eventually someone wrote down the story. What do you suppose happened to the stories over the years, as they were told and retold by people who had themselves heard them 5th or 6th or 19th hand? Did you or your kids ever play the telephone game at a birthday party? Is it any wonder that the Gospels are so full of discrepancies? Elsewhere, he says, the Gospels are not memories recorded by eyewitnesses. They are memories of later authors who had heard about Jesus from others. Each person in that link of memory from Jesus to the writers of the Gospels was remembering what he or she had heard, or trying to do so. Ehrman cites several memory psychologists and laboratory studies to demonstrate the unreliability of both individual eyewitness testimony and group memory. Moreover, he cites S.C. Bartlett's experiment on serial production. In the experiment, subject A would read a short story/prose, and after an interval of 15 to 30 minutes, would write it down through memory. Subject B would then be shown the writing, and the whole process would start over with several more subjects. Unsurprisingly, the stories became corrupted over time. Ehrman thus argues that experimental psychology bolsters his telephone game analogy for the oral transmission of the Jesus tradition. There are several problems with Ehrman's thesis, however. The use of memory distortion experiments to mirror the cultural milieu of the early church. Experiments are usually decontextualized from the natural social environments in which actual remembering occurs. Subjects are often randomly chosen with no social connection to each other or the material. Additionally, these experiments usually utilize single-chain transmission and semantic memory, when oral tradition is more relevant to group/net transmission and communal memory. This is important because if one version in the net changes or omits parts not originally in the tradition, other versions can correct it. Thus, the audience can learn the appropriate amount of variation. Thus, David C. Rubin says, the changes that occur when a passage is transmitted from person to person are much greater in psychology experiments than they are in oral tradition. Oral tradition, in fact, is specifically designed as a set of strategies calibrated precisely to counter these frailties. Oral tradition relies on various cues that provide stability. I cannot discuss all of these in this video, but for more on these devices, see these sources. Additionally, Jesus and his disciples preached publicly to many people, not a few isolated people secretly spreading his teachings. Those in the audience who misunderstood the tradition had both original eyewitnesses in leadership roles and delegates to correct them. Tradition core to the early Christian community would not have been treated as a party game. In conclusion, Bart Ehrman has presented more on rumor transmission than oral tradition, and thus erroneously conflates the two. However, do we have good reason for believing the Jesus tradition to be formally transmitted by the early church? I'll be posting a video soon on this topic, so stay tuned. God bless everyone.